Hello, welcome to the Japan Zoominar at UC San Diego. I'm Ulrike Schede and I'm the director of JFIT, the Japan Forum for Innovation and Technology at UC San Diego. To be more precise, we are at GPS, the School of Global Policy and Strategy. We are an international relations and public policy school, and we have 7 degree programs, including a Master's of International Affairs with a Japan specialization. If any of that is of interest, please visit gps.ucsd.edu. At GPS, we have JFIT, a Japan center that hopes to connect Southern California and Japan. If you would like to know more about our activities and get involved, look us up at jfit.ucsd.edu. We also have a news flash that everybody can sign up for free. Just go to the before mentioned jfit.ucsd.edu and find the tab News and Media where you can then sign up. By the way, right next to it is the Japan Zoominars tab where we have all recorded past Japan Zoominars that you can listen to at your leisure, and also, of course, registrations for upcoming events. We are a public university, and so once in a while I'll ask for your help. And today is that day. I would much rather have you in our lecture hall, of course. I would much rather see you and interact with you, but we can't do that right now. But think about all the time and money you save by not having to find a parking space on the UCSD campus and schlepping all the way to the hall, and the time you save and the effort. So if you could just consider sharing those savings with us just a little bit, that would be great. You can do so with a credit card if you go to jfit.ucsd.edu. We're a public university, and every donation, large or small, will help us continue this event. Thank you. Our Zoominar is a weekly event, of course, as many of you know, every Tuesday at 4:30 p.m. Pacific time. And today we're going to talk about entrepreneurship, but let me just tell you what's coming up. Next week, I'll have my colleague Patricia McLachlan from UT Austin join me to talk about Japan's social policies and what might explain the fact that Japan is not currently struggling as some other countries in Europe and maybe the United States with issues of extreme populism and that sort of thing. And the following week, I'll have Richard Dyke and Robert Feldman to help me assess the late Ezra Vogel's impact on US Japan research and business. And we'll go from there to marketing and then politics. So please stay with us. It's every Tuesday, and you can sign up on our website. That's Patty right there, who I will have here next week. Alrighty then, let me stop my PowerPoints and introduce my panel today. So it's entrepreneurship time, and I couldn't think of better guests than Bob Eberhardt and Kenji Kutsuna, two of my dear colleagues that I have worked with for a long time. And indeed, right now I'm working with Professor Kutsuna on an education program with Kobe University. So thank you both for joining. So let me introduce you real quick. So Professor Kenji Kutsuna is a professor of finance, of entrepreneurial finance, in fact, at the Graduate School of Business Administration at Kobe University. His research is on the financial aspects of entrepreneurship, so that includes corporate finance, VC investments, IPOs, and his work has been published in many of the leading global journals in finance, including the Journal of Finance, actually. And he has all of his degrees, a BA, MA, and PhD in commerce, are from Osaka City University. And he's also, in addition to publishing many papers, he's a multiple winner of the Best Book Award in small business from the Shoko Research Institute. So Professor Kutsuna, welcome to the Japan Zoominar. It's great to have you here. And our second guest is Dr. Robert Eberhardt. He directs research on how entrepreneurship shapes society at Stanford's Graduate School of Business. Bob has a PhD in management science, also from Stanford, and has previously been in a variety of professorial positions, including Santa Clara University. He was, at some point, the vice chairman of the US Department of State METI, Japan US Innovation Entrepreneurship Council, and has written several award winning papers on the topic of innovation and entrepreneurship, not only in Japan, but often with a Japan aspect. Prior to his academic career, Bob is a Renaissance man and has had several careers. He started out as a semiconductor and electronics hardware business person. And then he was the founder and CEO of Wine in Style, a company that exported California wine to Tokyo. And in fact, Bob tells us that he is the first gaijin, the first foreign business person ever in Japan to receive an alcohol license, a license to sell alcohol. So from that, of course, you gained a lot, and you've also been a venture capitalist at some point. So Bob, thank you also for joining me today. So let me just set up the stage before I then turn to Kenji and then to you, Bob. So many governments around the world are spending a lot of money to, whether that's in Europe or the Middle East or Latin America, Indo-Pacific or Asia, spending a lot of money to build their version of Silicon Valley. There is this idea that startups are great for economic growth, and if economic growth stalls for some other reason, startups will bail us out, so to say. There will be an engine of economic development. And Japan has been one of the most active places of running such programs. By my estimate, for the last 20 years, I would say the Japanese government has spent at least $100 billion on this effort, if not much more. And these efforts range from building incubators to having grant programs to running government-run VC funds that invest in venture in startup companies. And so that's a great example. It's by no means the only example. In fact, I mean, the United States, Silicon Valley started as a government project. So the question then for us today is, how do we measure success? The Japanese government thought that they would create 23 unicorns and that would be success. That hasn't happened, but I actually think the Japanese program is quite successful. But how would we know? Right? My colleague Les Lyons here at GSB at GPS has a paper in the Strategic Management Journal showing that in Canada, government-run education programs for entrepreneurs actually increase the network of these people and also their ability to then launch a successful career, right? So what have we learned from 20 years of trying to do this around the world? Is the money spent wisely? Could it be spent better? And how do we know success when we see it? So those are the questions for today. And Professor Kutsuna, why don't we start with you and have you kind of recap some of the programs that Japan's government has done over the past so many years.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me to the webinar. Let me briefly introduce myself. I'm a professor of finance, Kobe University. My main research area is entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial finance. In particular, venture capital investments and IPOs. Yeah, I have published some academic papers in finance journals. Yeah. Firstly, I would like to explain the current situations in Japan. I would like to explain the current situation of entrepreneurship programs. Various entrepreneurship programs have been offered by the national government, local governments, and universities. One of important program is EdgeNext program. As the name suggests, this program is aimed at producing global entrepreneurs. Another important program is Shido. The purpose of this program is producing next innovators in Japan. This program, try to help people change from thinkers to doers. In addition, the government provided a large amount of funds to four major universities: Tokyo University, Kyoto University, Osaka University, and Tohoku universities, to establish university venture capital firms to stimulate the creation of university launched ventures. Many universities throughout Japan are offering educational and practitioner programs related to entrepreneurship. Yeah, there are major, some major challenges still remains in Japan. I would like to point out 3 points. First is only few startups target global markets. Many Japanese entrepreneurs target the Japanese domestic market, not global market. Second is potential unicorns face growing difficulties, mainly due to the lack of human resources and financial resources. The third one is issue of regional gap between Tokyo and other regions. Behind these, there are some reasons. For example, the lack of organization in management team for startups and university launched ventures. The function of seed acceleration is weak, in particular in regional cities. And the lack of knowledge of equity finance. Many Japanese entrepreneurs lack knowledge of equity finance because entrepreneurs have been thinking of finance from banks. And there are some problems related to venture capital investments and IPO markets. For the example, about 70% of venture capital investments concentrated on Tokyo area, and the location of IPO firms is also concentrated on Tokyo area. Finally, I'd like to show some my own related initiatives. First is I'm teaching for entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial finance in Graduate School of Business Administration, Kobe University, in MBA course. And there is a Sesame program. This program is, in this program, all lectures are provided in English. SE means strategic entrepreneurship. Bob is lecturers of Sesame program. And third one is Global Entrepreneurship Development Program. This program is sponsored by Cabinet Office, Hyogo Prefecture, and Kobe City. And UC San Diego support this program. And second is Graduate School for Science, Technology, and Innovation. This Kobe University newly founded this graduate school 5 years ago. In this school, innovation and entrepreneurship education are provided to graduate students in science field. And third and fourth one are seed acceleration companies. I found two companies 5 years ago and 3 years ago to strengthen the function of seed acceleration. The following slides summarize the details of these programs, but that's all for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kenji. That's a terrific introduction. And you didn't mention that the city of Kobe itself also has a large number of programs, right? And there's a great initiative there. We'll get back to that. Okay, Bob, let me turn the microphone over to you and tell us a little bit from your vantage point, both as a practitioner and now as a researcher and a research director, to what we should know.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here, particularly with two people whom I've known for decades and have come to admire and have inspired a lot of my research. And I'm very honored to be associated with the Kobe programs. It's one of the best universities in the world and has some of the most famous faculty, and are terrific. And so does, I can't say enough about University of San Diego and Oreke Center, which has been putting out some very seminal research lately. So it's a very proud thing for me to be associated with both of you. I wanted to talk to you, as you suggested, what about creating Silicon Valley someplace else other than Silicon Valley? And I do want to talk about it because people do that a lot. This is not a new thing, by the way. In 1864 or so, the Japanese government sent people to the United States to observe industrial development in the United States and what made us tick. And of course, they went to Cleveland, which was the hot part of the United States at the time, and learned some things. So it's not surprising that people would want to come learn from Silicon Valley. And when people come to Silicon Valley to look at, maybe we should be a bit like Silicon Valley, they look at it for two reasons, right? One, they want to create a core of economic activity that generates technical startups, generates jobs, generates economic activity. And the output of this is supposed to be jobs in a robust economy. And they hope that happens. And what do? Well, they come to Silicon Valley and they look around and sniff the air and they go, wow, there's Stanford University and Berkeley, so there must be universities associated with this thing. And look, there are all these VCs up here on Sand Hill Road, and they're all making money and having some really cool lunches, so maybe we ought to see what they're doing. There's all these young people coming up with creative ideas. You can see them sitting in the coffee shops. I may note that means they're not working, but that's another thing. And there's this environment that they believe there's an environment that fosters creativity. There's plug and play, there's various accelerators, there's all these things that you see. So you develop this kind of idea when people try to copy Silicon Valley of a knowledge base that comes out of the universities, a finance supply that comes from some developed private equity and venture capital, and a youthful kind of young creative group of workers that come up with kind of cool ideas. The problem with that is that if you're copying that, you're copying the end of something, not the beginning. You're not copying what made it that way, you're copying what it is. So it's kind of like going to a city and saying, I like that city, I'll build those same buildings and then I'll have a city. No, you won't. The cities are at a core developed from where they are geographically, where they're near water, are they on trade routes? And we found cities very, very rarely. I don't know when the last major city in Japan was founded, but I think it's Tokyo, and and that was a long time ago. San Jose, founded about the same time as Jacksonville, Florida, by the way. Our area here where we live was founded in the 1770s. Cities aren't founded that much. They're hard things to do, and I'm going to suggest that Silicon Valley is another hard thing to develop and just sort of copy. And the biggest problem is that we copy what's there at the end. When we copy VCs, when we try to copy Silicon Valley, we find some VCs and put them in place, and then we find some incubators and start them, and then we put up coffee shops and hope that people will show up. It doesn't really happen that way. Silicon Valley didn't start that way. VCs and incubators came after Silicon Valley was a vibrant entrepreneurial community. And let me give you some dates just to kind of fix this. Intel was started in 1968, Apple in 1976, National Semiconductor in 1959, HP in 1939. Advanced Micro Devices in 1969, Fairchild Semiconductor in 1957, Genentech in 1976, DEC in 1957. You get the idea that foundational companies that were here in Silicon Valley aren't recent phenomena, the children of incubators or venture capital financed. This was a robust computer industry. And we're in the center of a robust computer distributed system software industry, which developed in the United States in the 50s and 60s and just happened to be a good place to do it here. In fact, I'm going to share my screen just for a second, just so I can show the slide. This is one of the reasons. This is a Saturn V, in case anybody doesn't know what it is. It's the rocket that went to the moon. It was designed in 1962. First flew in 1967. It's as tall as any building in San Diego, by the way. If you just plopped one of these down in San Diego, you would see it. Okay, it's taller than any building in San Jose. It weighs 6 million pounds. And it had to be launched from a speed of 0 to a speed of 17,000 miles an hour in 2.5 minutes. The problem with that is that a human can't control that. You couldn't put a steering wheel in there and steer yourself to orbit. So it took computers. Again, remember, this was designed in 1962. Computers were the size of this rocket then and not very strong. So there was a huge program to develop the computers, which are now sit in this band, which are in this band to develop semiconductors and other things to make light semi. It was the key thing, one of the key things that made this thing work at all. And that's what these companies in Silicon Valley were formed around, this burgeoning computer industry, which built off the radio industry, which was already here. Right? The problem is the reason Silicon Valley is successful is not because it was copied, but because it was part of a particular historical structure and processes that just came together. Why is Tokyo a city? Same reason. Okay, and the reason it doesn't get work being copied is because they don't copy the things that generated Silicon Valley. Number one, a massive government spending on advanced technology. I've never gone to a proto Silicon Valley where they say it's the first thing we're going to do. We have an advanced technology we need for political needs, and we're going to spend a significant fraction of our GDP to make it happen, which is how it got going here. When we say they want to educate a workforce, here, the educated workforce was here because job prospects were good. I can remember working here in the 90s, and you literally could start a company, fail, then go back to national and get your job again. You weren't in the economy was so robust, people felt free to start companies. Nowadays, that's changed. Your only choice sometimes is to start a company, and failure can be very, very bad. We have lots of immigration here. That brings us with a supply of people that are very, very motivated to start successful companies. And we have really nice weather. So we have to ask ourselves, is this what Japan is doing to copy Silicon Valley? Well, there's not much you can do about the weather. I'll grant them that. If you've ever been in August in Tokyo, you know you want to be someplace else. But it's nice the rest of the year. They're not doing much about getting lots of immigration. All right. There's a robust economy there, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. So that's good, but we're not doing massive government spend to generate advanced technology. The real worry that we have in Japan is that sometimes they compare, and let me do my slide again. And let's hope this works. It does. Japan likes to talk much about its its poor startup rate. And we've talked about that a lot, but let me point a comparison here that's kind of interesting. These are the number of US starts on average over the past 10 years in terms of numbers of companies. This is about 650,000 of all kinds, okay? And the number of US firms that start every year is about 6.5, not the firms that start every year. The number of firms in the United States, the total base, is about 6.5 million. So the startup rate is 10%. 600,000, 6 million, okay? Japan starts are about a third of American starts. If you think about it, that's what you expect. Japan's economy is about the third the size of the United States. Okay, about 200,000. But Japan has a lot of existing companies. Almost as many existing companies as the United States. It's because of the difference in tax laws when you just close a company. But Japan's rate is 3% smaller. It says 3%, not 10%, because of the simple fact they have many more companies there. If you just made the number of companies in Japan 1/3 the size of the United States, then Japan's rate would be 10%. So Japan, the point is Japan likes to worry that it isn't so good and then goes about processes to make it happen. So I want to close with some things, some ideas from things we know from research. If copying the structures of Silicon Valley doesn't work, what does work? Or what does research indicate might work if we wanted to create a robust system? Well, first, it turns out that entrepreneurship is most robust, that is successful technical entrepreneurship, not just general entrepreneurship, in healthy economies. This is surprising because it means that there's an internal contradiction. If you're trying to create a healthy economy by starting in Silicon Valley, and the precondition is a healthy economy. But people need to, you have to have customers in big companies. You have to have the security of being able to find a job. You need to have a good institutional environment. That is, people have to know they can conduct agreements, write contracts, get contract violations quickly resolved, their patents be protected, all those things. That has to happen. We need to have tons of exogenous spending on markets. There has to be a lot of somebody trying to create this huge external demand. And if we do that, and you're willing to wait for 50 years, then I think you can copy Silicon Valley. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Bob. There's I jotted down 10 questions, so lots to talk about, and so thank you both. Just a quick reminder to the audience and for those of you who are new, we don't have a way to have you speak, but you can type your questions into the Q&A field, and I will weave them into our conversation that we're going to have now. Because this is recorded and will be online later, I will only refer to you in the audience by your first name to protect your privacy. And lo and behold, we already have the first question, which is a great question. It's Michelle who would like to know what entrepreneurship, the construct of entrepreneurship. Does entrepreneurship mean the same thing in Japan as it does here? Or is there is a construct actually different? Is there a different, cultural connotation? And I think that it is when, if I bring in Germany and other places, I think there is a difference across countries, but I don't know who of you would like to take that question, but I think it gets us to this question of why can't we copy it, right? What do we even mean by an innovation ecosystem? Bob, you want to take that?
Sure, I'm happy to. It is really good. And I take this from the perspective, I started a company in Japan. I had 4 rounds of venture capital, sold it successfully. In fact, the company's still there and operating. Pay me anything, so anyway. But it was, I've started it. The key thing about it is that I've started companies in the United States too, and I didn't notice any differences really other than the language, and you have to be a little more polite in Japan. What's interesting about it is that when we say entrepreneurship, we do say different things though. When we talk generally about entrepreneurship and encouraging it, we're not talking about starting a dental practice, which is in other definitions an entrepreneurial activity. We're usually not talking about opening a restaurant. Somebody wants a Google. And what's interesting about that is that there's a difference between the actuality and aspirational. The aspirational is we want lots of these, like the United States have. But if you think about it, the United States has less than 10. And we don't, we don't really think about, do we have entrepreneurship? Does it mean everything, or does it just mean the little thing? And when people say it, they mean different things. I want to say one other thing about this. When for many, many years in the United States, we did studies of entrepreneurship, and we looked and found that small businesses created lots and lots of the jobs. And they do in Japan too. But we had previously never distinguished the age of the companies before. It's only in the last 5 years that the census has started looking at the age of the companies. And it turns out, if you look at new companies only, they don't produce much employment. Old small companies do. So this beast that we're talking about, entrepreneurship, what does it mean? What jobs, all that stuff, it needs to be much more precise in academic research and needs to inform the way we think we generate policies.
Yeah, I mean, we could have a special session about the difficulties of actually doing this research, because how do you know a ramen shop from a tech startup guy, right?
Right.
But I think Michelle's question is actually a little bit more onto the society and the culture and the cultural norms around, Japan is a tight place, and so is there any positive stereotype at all associated with being an entrepreneur? And I think that that's exactly what the Japanese government programs are trying to change, right? So in Japan, and maybe Kenji, you can help us with this. In Japan, there's currently a debate about the daikigyo, the disease, the large company disease, which is actually a bad word. It's a bad word, right? So what's a disease about? The disease is that society still attaches higher social status to somebody who works in a large company than somebody who works in a small company. And this is a part of the stereotype. So to this question, Kenji, because you run these programs, right? Has the societal acceptance or status of the entrepreneur changed over the last 2 decades?
Yes, I think the circumstances surrounding business persons is sharply changing. For example, my Kobe University's students recently found some startup companies after working for large famous companies for 5 or 10 years. Young generations are very active to be entrepreneurs. So I'm feeling that young persons, for example, in particularly young persons are very active to be entrepreneurs. However, as I introduced Shido programs, this program tried to help people change from thinker to doer. Many business persons are thinking and thinking of entrepreneurship. However, many business persons do not be a doer. So in near future, I'm feeling that many business persons would be entrepreneurs.
Can I add one more thing to that, please? Yeah, it's really important, I think, to understand that an economy, particularly a just economy, has to accommodate all kinds. Not everyone wants to be an entrepreneur. Not everyone ought to be. And big companies have very important uses. Number one, they provide the customers as to entrepreneurs. Number two, they provide suppliers. Second of all, companies pay better. Big companies pay better than little ones, and longer term jobs. And they are an important buffer of equality in the economy. So we shouldn't discourage I wouldn't want to do it, but if somebody wants to work in the accounting section of a big company and they're happy doing that, I don't see any reason to discourage them from it. We ought to find the people that want to be entrepreneurs. And in that case, we know what makes people, they have to be a little bit older and very experienced. So I think we need to think who we're teaching and not try to do broad things. And the second thing I just have to mention, I never found an entrepreneur in Japan to be any different than an entrepreneur in the United States. I definitely found an employee of, a large company be different than an entrepreneur. But the entrepreneurs in Japan are entrepreneurs like anywhere. And I think it's regional. You won't find many entrepreneurs who talk like Silicon Valley in Detroit, my hometown, so I'll pick on them. So it's regional, and it is in Japan too.
So, so those of you in the audience who have listened to earlier iterations of the Japan Zoominar know that I had Michelle Gelfand actually on the show. She's the author of Rule Makers, Rule Breakers, and thinks about the world of tight and loose, right? And for her, it would be obvious, right, that a loose society would have higher degrees of entrepreneurship, but might be actually much worse off when they try to scale this into large organized businesses, whereas a tight country might find it much easier to operate like Toyota does in a very organized fashion. But there would be fewer rule breakers that are willing to stick out their neck and go against the grain and start a company when everybody else in their class is going to work for some Mitsubishi or so so there is this thing about sticking out, and I think that was actually part of the reason. We have a question from Michael actually that I'd like to weave into this, which is that in the 1960s, Japan had a lot of entrepreneurship. Sony, not in the 60s, earlier than that, but post-war, right? And Bob, it speaks a little bit to your story about the opportunity being there, the necessity being there, the fast growth being there. And so if you were Mr. Morita or Mr. Honda or Mr. Matsushita, yeah, you could just do it, right? And you would succeed because the market is growing. And this large company disease came on much later when structures ossified, right? And so what we're seeing here is de-ossifying these structures. So Kenji, do you see that happening? What would it take to turn this upside down, right? To make the entrepreneur the modal, the celebrated person, and the company worker sort of the boring guy. Is there a chance that Japan could actually change its culture around that?
Yes, I think there is interesting successful case. For example, Fukuoka City is going to be entrepreneurial city, and in Fukuoka City, Kyushu University is essential role for innovation and entrepreneurship education. In Fukuoka, some major companies move from Tokyo, headquarters of the company, move from Tokyo to Fukuoka, and Kyushu University provides a very interesting entrepreneurship program and support for students to be entrepreneurs. So I think Fukuoka is a good model for Japanese regional cities. And the mayor of Fukuoka City declared Fukuoka City would be entrepreneurial city. So I think it's important to make the city itself entrepreneurial. So I feel the Fukuoka city is a good model for us.
And I agree with you that it is happening, right? And there's also now a sort of, Bob, you were kind of saying, well, the coffee shops and so forth, but the fashion and the coffee shops are part of it. They're expressions of this new culture and part of that ecosystem. On that note about the ecosystem, we have a question from Shuwen and Rick, both regarding the success and the dominance of IPOs as an exit option. This has been pointed out by many people, right? In Japan, the ratio of, so if you look at exits for startup companies, the ratio of IPOs to sales, right, an acquisition by a large company is something like 80-20, whereas in Silicon Valley it's 20-80. That is, only 20% of Silicon Valley companies actually go to the IPO, and 80% are just sell to a larger company, take the money and make a new one. And that's where the serial entrepreneurs come from, right? And so one of the big intentions with the current J Startup program by the Japanese government is to involve the large companies and to basically nudge or shame Keidanren, with a large business umbrella association, to participate and interact with startup companies and consider just purchasing, sort of buying them up, in order just to facilitate exit. But back to the IPOs. So why are there so many IPOs? It's basically the only way to exit, really. I mean, it's so difficult to do anything but. And why is Japan using IPOs as a success measure in research and otherwise? Bob, you want to take that?
Sure, I'm happy to. There's several things. First is, better than I do, there's some historical legacies for the reliance on IPOs versus mergers. By the way, I exited in a merger. But the triangular mergers were not allowed until, I forget what it was, year 2000 or something. I can't really remember. But there's historical reasons for this. But a second reason gets to your point, which I thought was really terrific. Why is the IPO the measure of success? That's an exit. That's where you stop being an entrepreneur. The certainly the Silicon Valley idea, so-called hypercapitalism, is the idea of the company is to generate, the purpose of the company, a new company anyway, is to generate wealth for its investors. And of course, in that case, a merger and IPO is really, really important. But if you're creating jobs, if you're creating long-term stability, that's an IPO for. Maybe you need more liquidity. I would get that, you know. But we have to think carefully as we design what we want the government to do and what we want to teach. What are our objectives for even having this entrepreneurial environment that we're trying to create? Japan doesn't have a problem that I see needs fixing. It has very low employment. It has very stable company growth. It has a very long lifespan. It's got healthcare. I wish we had that. It's got, it's got, I just looking at a webcam of Shibuya. The streets are clean and they're nicely paved, and the cars are all new. Japan doesn't seem to have a really obvious, really bad problem it's dealing with. It's more perception that it's falling behind. And maybe that's an historical legacy too. So I think your point is being very well taken. That IPO seen as a success, it's almost, I want to be like Silicon Valley, the United States, but I'm not sure why you'd want to copy us. And that's my point. And the second thing I really have to make point, because it's coming through in several of these questions. The key skill as a nation doing entrepreneurship in the United States and Japan has been organizational, not technical. What the key skills we have as countries are organizing to make a profit and running the company and organizing it in a way that it employs people and grows. Okay. Chandler started this with a lot of work in political economies and all this. And Japan's done a wonderful job of that too. So I think as it gets to your point, is IPO the right thing we need to think about? It gets to objectives. What are we trying to fix and what are we trying to do? And we sometimes don't stop and give ourselves credit that, the economy runs really, really well in Japan. At least from my perspective.
Yeah, and Rick just footnoted that by saying, yeah, look, I mean, getting rich should not be the goal, right? The goal should be to build a great company. And by the way, that's what we see in Silicon Valley. A lot of these companies are now 40 years old, and they're no
That's
longer
exactly
startup
right.
companies.
And we're seeing breathtaking inequality in Silicon Valley. And that's something we worry about. I mean,
That's
breathtaking inequality. And one of the great things about Japan is the general equality of the place.
But let me ask Kenji though, because Shuwen also had a question about how do we do research about this, right? So the IPO is a great way for us to use as a success variable, right? So
Yes.
Kenji, in your research, which is large data sets of entrepreneurial companies and how they're financed and how they exit and that sort of thing, right? What do you consider as alternative measures of a startup success other than just
Yes. Historically in Japan, there are basically only one exit route of IPOs. Exit route through M&A is very limited to almost entrepreneurs. However, recently, M&A market is gradually expanding. However, many entrepreneurs are trying to go public in the market, such as Mothers and Jastek. But Japanese IPO, the listing criteria is very loose, so there are many small IPOs companies. So after listing, the volatility of IPO companies is very high. So it's very difficult to finance secondary finance after the IPO. So it's very difficult to expand rapidly after IPO. So this is a big program for the financing for Japanese IPO companies. Yeah, I think so.
So that's interesting. So there could be a regulation that might help this, right? And by the way, I just want to make sure that we're not misunderstood. We got a comment from Nobu that change is happening, and that's why we're here, right? Change is happening, and the government programs are working. And so let me move to that part of the conversation. So I titled this event, Can Entrepreneurship Be Taught? And of course, the answer is yes. Yeah, of course. We can teach finance. We can teach how to build a business model. We can teach all the tools, right? We also, as professors, are our network node, right? We have a lot of students that start their own companies. We know what works. We know their stories. We can connect those and collect the events. So of course we do this because we believe it can be taught. But can an entrepreneurial spirit be taught? Right. So that maybe goes back to something that we had earlier. But so can the government really create an environment where people suddenly are more entrepreneurial? And we have a question for several people asked about, are we defining this way too narrowly? Is this only about tech startups? What about social entrepreneurs, political entrepreneurs, community entrepreneurs, right? So can one instill, what do you think? Can one instill into people a drive to do something new and think outside the box and all of those good things? Bob, you want to start with that, because that you're doing research right now.
I mean, I'm doing research right there. And by the way, just to make a point on the last thing, I published a paper that the loosening standards in the Tokyo Stock Exchange actually did decrease the quality of what got funded and hurt future financing. So that's an absolutely correct point. Let's talk about teaching and creating mindset. Right. I mean, let's think about teaching entrepreneurship, and teaching mindset is part of it. As you suggested, I mean, part of teaching entrepreneurship is just the mechanics. And of course, you can teach this to high school students. How do you fill out the form to start a corporation, and what's double entry accounting and all that stuff. But to be an entrepreneur, you're really going to have to be a leader and an organizer. And to be a leader and an organizer, you're going to have to be inspiring. You're going to have a vision, and teaching that's really difficult. Depending on who you talk to, some people think the military is good at teaching this stuff, and they may do. But there's clearly no substitute for at least some experience. Also, to be an entrepreneur, it's very clear you need to have deep industry experience. Nobody comes to an industry and then invents something. That's like saying you get you're going to write a great contribution to new knowledge before you start your PhD program. No, first you have to read the work. You have to read what's already there. And same thing with entrepreneurship. You can't start a company without knowing. And that takes a lot of time. That's not easy to teach. That's a lot of experience. And then finally, the motivation, what you were talking about. I've run a company. And trust me, the only good night's sleep I had was the day I sold it. And you have to want to keep doing it all the time. You're responsible to a lot of people. And I believe, and I know talking with other entrepreneurs, that you get that motivation, you get that inspiration from a very solid liberal education. Lots of literature, knowing music, knowing different languages, basically being a well-rounded person. All these things can be taught, but at different rates and in different places. And probably why we know for sure from experience, a person over 40 is some 3 times more likely to found a successful company than a person under 30. And part of it is probably this total education you get before you start.
Kenji, what do you see in Japan? Can you talk about some of your students, right, and how they're changing over time, right? So what is the entrepreneurial spirit in Japan, and how is it?
Many students are interested in the classes related to entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial finance. However, very, very few students to be real entrepreneurs. So I think it's essential how to change students or business persons from receiving education program to doer to be real entrepreneurs. So I think the function of seed acceleration is essential for resolve this problem.
And do you see that changing in Japan? I mean, what are some of the things that you do to impact that?
Yes, due to the severe economic stagnations, many students are anxious for working for large companies, so they are very interested in the entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship. So I think in near future, many students select to be an entrepreneur.
So that's great, and kind of brings me to the larger question of is there too much of a good thing? Is the entrepreneurship theme overdrawn right now? I mean, are we over celebrating it? I mean, there's always people that are much better off in a large corporation, and then there are always people that are much better off doing their own thing, or starting their own company, or work with a smaller group of companies. So there's a destination for everybody, right? But right now it sounds as if across the world, not just Japan at all, right? So Europe is another great case study for this, that if you're not really saying anything positive about entrepreneurship, you're not hip. You're kind of, you missed something. Bob, you're nodding. Tell us what
I'm totally not hip, I guess. No, there's entrepreneurship has a place. There's no question about it. And people who want to do it should be trained. But understand, it's a profession that 80% of your students are going to end up very sad. I don't know another profession like that. And so it seems to me you have an obligation, not so much go ahead and do it. But yeah, this is how you do it, and here's how we maximize your chances. But you should take a very clear view of what your chances are and what maximizes your success, and do what successful entrepreneurs do, which is protect your downside. Okay, don't bet the whole farm, in other words. So I worry, as you do, Ulrike, and others, that you can go overboard, and you hear it in some of your questions in the comments. How do we apply this to social problems? Well, I thought we did that with charities and government programs. How do we apply this to, addressing inequality? Well, it's probably one of the driving forces of inequality. So why do we want more? So we think about it, and what we worry about, at least in our project, is what are we transforming? Are we transmitting? Are we transmitting an idea of entrepreneurship sort of distorted, where it's okay to fail? We go embark on this entrepreneurial career and be Uber drivers. I don't know, rather than the hard work of finding a market opportunity that's growing fast, devising a solution for that, constructing an organization that can make a profit out of that and do well for everybody that works with you. Right. And so the risk that the entrepreneurship kind of applied to everything detracts us when we teach entrepreneurship to what it really is.
So this brings me to maybe the final theme that I would like to discuss with you today, which is what have we learned? And I want to bring in a question from Clementina, who says, well, Bob, you read your list, right, of the things that an innovation ecosystem has to do, which, by the way, is a list of the late Bill Miller, I think, and Harry Rowan, who wrote it in the book, Make IT Happen, right? That these like 15 components of an innovation ecosystem. And Clementina's question is whether that was too bounded by a developed economy, or even just like the United States. And sure enough, I think that's so. What have we learned? So if the Japanese government or the German government or any government were to come to us and say, hey guys, you've been studying this for 20 years and you've been doing it, right? Japan has been doing it for 20 years. And what have you observed? And what is it that we should or should not do if we want to get this right? And so, some things that come to my mind while you're thinking about this question. I mean, one thing that comes to my mind is to bring in the large companies to create a real demand for small company innovation, right? And the second is to increase labor mobility, which is happening in Japan in leaps and bounds, right? So we have this moment of labor mobility, and to make it easier for a Japanese startup company to be to be an accepted player. And there are a couple of ways in which that has to happen. But so what do you think? So Kenji, maybe I could start with you. Right? So are some of the initiatives working better than others? And what would you advise your government to do to make a real breakthrough?
Oh, yeah. Okay. I would like to comment about another successful case in Japan. I think there are so many role models in Silicon Valley. However, there are very few role models in Japan nearby. However, University Tokyo is a good example of a successful case in Japan. So many student entrepreneurs and academic entrepreneurs generated in Tokyo University. I think there are so many role models nearby in Tokyo University. So the situation of Japan is gradually changing. I think so.
Thank you. If you want to go, Ulrike?
Yeah, why don't you wrap it up then with the answer to that question, if you have?
It's a terrific question, and how can I help? Yeah, there's several things. First of all, we have to develop a clear view of what we're trying to accomplish before we can say we're trying to do something. You could point out the search for role models. Research is clear. People don't pay attention, entrepreneurs don't pay attention to role models. They do pay attention to their peers. They start companies if their friends are. They don't start companies because Mikitani is. And that's really, really important. The second thing, innovation versus market opportunity. Successful entrepreneurs tend to find big growing markets and then figure out how to sell something into it, irrespective of whether it's innovative or not. Right, so we don't know if we're putting cart before the horse there either. And just like I said in my initial remarks, are we copying the end or copying the beginning? If we want to create something, maybe we want to copy the beginning. And it gets to this point, what's worked and what hasn't. In the United States, we've been increasingly encouraging entrepreneurship over the past 2 decades. And the rate of entrepreneurship has declined steadily over that entire time. In Japan, we've had declines in the mid part of the 20th century, the 2010s, but it's climbing back again now. But overall, been a very flat trajectory over an enormous amount of money spent to do things. So it's not we should beat ourselves up to say we're doing it wrong, but say clearly whatever we're doing isn't probably the best thing to do either. And there's new work out saying that academics have been bad people in this thing. We have driven attention to technical companies only, to VC finance companies only, which even in the United States is a very small number of companies, and to companies that grow fast rather than grow steadily. And it does, as one of your questioners say, it does tend to lend a focus on developed countries, the top 5 or 10, and doesn't look at the developing countries, which have a different problem. And my main worry that I'm going to leave you with is if we take a solution that only works maybe in a developed country and apply it to developing countries and expect it to work, I don't think that's the best strategy, and it doesn't pay attention to the differences between the two. But that said, I think we're on the right track. We're asking questions. We're doing it all right. So I'm very proud to have heard everything I heard today.
Well, thank you very much, both. Time is up. We have to say goodbye for today. Thank you both for joining me. It's terrific to have you. Great conversation. And I could go on for hours, but alas, we can't. Everybody, thank you for joining us today. And please come and see us again next week with Professor Patricia McLachlan from the University of Texas, Austin, to discuss Japan social policies. And I'll leave you with that. And have a good day. Stay safe, everybody, and see you next week.
Stay safe. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.